All right, let's move on. I mean, here you are, a priest, and you get a call, apparently, from, is it the Ammons family? Is that correct?
Ammons.
Ammons, okay. Ammons family. That's a long A. Okay. Ammons family, and they wanted your help. And why did they want your help? What was going on?
Yeah, I kind of got involved in all this by accident. I cover for the Catholic priest chaplain who works in the two Methodist hospitals in our area, one in Gary, one in Maryville, next door. And his days off are Friday and Saturday. And so I usually get called in for emergencies.
Right.
And so on the Friday, April 20th, 2012, I was doing what I normally do on Friday morning as my Bible study class. Mm-hmm. And I got the call from the Methodist Hospital in Gary from the chaplain who asked me to come over to do an exorcism. And I said, why's that? And he mentioned that this 9-year-old boy was seen by several professional staff people walking up the wall backwards and flipping over his grandmother, and they ran out of the room, and they got the security to look in that. The security then called the police. They called the chaplain.
Would you mind rolling over that again? You said that he was walking up a wall backward?
Backwards, yeah. So the way it happened, it was the Child Protective Services were noticing that the children, the 3 children, were missing school a lot, and sometimes when they were at school, they would have things like bloody noses, bloody gums, and different things. And so there was a lot of suspicion that something wasn't right at home.
Right.
And so they kind of got involved and asked, and it was the mother and grandmother were kind of watching over the children. Sure. And so they took them to their doctor to have them examine the children.
Yes.
And to see what's wrong.
Family doctor, right?
The family doctor.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so in that doctor's office, it first of all started with what would happen is this demon would jump from one child to the other. And so it would affect one child and then do crazy things and then jump to the next one and continue probably to do about similar type of things. So,
walking up a wall backwards, that's movie stuff. I mean, do you have other people who saw this happen, witnesses?
Yeah, there's a couple of professional witnesses. One was the child protective agent, and the other one was a psychological nurse, and I think a psychiatric doctor also saw the same thing. So they were... but that was at the hospital in the emergency room, which they took the children to after the doctor's office. Because in the doctor's office, one boy was picked up and thrown into the wall.
What?
And before that, they were kind of growling and saying everyone must die, very grovelly voice. And
Father, hold on.
Their eyes were rolling.
Right. Oh no, I'm getting this, Father. Just stop for a second. It's a 9-year-old boy we're talking about right now. How many children totally?
There's 3 children.
3.
The 2 boys are they were right in the time of their birthdays. So it was like one was like 7, turning to 8. The other one was 9, turning to 10, right. And then one was the girl. Was the oldest, was 11, turning to 12. Their birthdays were right around that time.
7, 9, and 11. Okay, and you're saying that this demon jumped between all of these children back and forth?
Yeah, it would kind of jump from one to the other when it was active, and it also we originally found it stemmed from the mother, but but no one kind of knew it at that time. But and so when one boy got thrown against the wall, he would kind of fall asleep, and they couldn't wake him up.
Father, do you mean up into the air and up against the wall like that?
Yeah, they saw him be picked up, thrown to the wall, and knocked down, and then he kind of fell. Then he would be unconscious.
Right.
And then the second boy was also kind of acting strange. Now he was kind of saying things, everyone must die, and growling and such, and then he kind of fell asleep, went unconscious. But they couldn't wake them up, either of the boys, and also the doctor, when he was seeing all this, he said, I don't have no idea what all this is. This is beyond my capacity. You got to call the ambulance. So they got 2 ambulances to take the 2 boys to the emergency room at the hospital. And
7-year-old and the 9-year-old.
So they went and it didn't seem to, I think the girl was there, but she didn't seem to be affected at that time. It seemed like they brought, the first thing happened to one boy, the next thing happened to the other boy, and then that's when they called the emergency, the ambulance.
Well, sure, yeah, I can only imagine a family doctor in his office seeing all this go on. It would be hands up, hands off, take them away.
Yeah. And I think the girl went with the mother and grandmother, and they followed the ambulance. The child protective servant agent also went over there. Now, when they got to the emergency room, the youngest boy it was going berserk, and so it took 5 guys to hold him down. They tried to restrain him and all that. And I think they ended up finally sedating him, and they kept him overnight for observation.
Sure.
And so it would be the next morning, the family would come back, the grandmother, mother, and also the girl would also come back. And in the morning, again, the one boy was kind of always talking about this boy, his friend. Now he would see this boy in the closet at their home that would talk to him about what it's like to die, what it's like to be killed, and so and then all of a sudden he'll start growling, and then again go uncontrollable, and then it'd take again 5 guys to try to hold him down, and then they'll try to strap him into the bed and into the gurney and all that, and sedate him. Then it kind of jumped to the other boy in the other observation room.
The 9-year-old?
So the 7-year-old was with the mother, and then it jumped into the other boy in the other room. This is the 9-year-old, and he was with his grandmother. And now he started acting strange. Now this is so that you had staff in these 2 rooms, okay?
Sure.
So and all of a sudden, when the 9-year-old started acting strange, he would start growling. He would start hitting his grandmother with headbutting her in her stomach, and says it's now time to die, and then she would try to coax him back, calling his name, and she was holding on to his hands, and as she was trying to coax him back, calling his name, she was backing him up against the wall, and as he came up to the wall, he started to there's 2 ways that it's described, that he walked up the wall. Some say kind of skated up the wall, glided up the wall, just kind of lifted up the wall. So that there was kind of a couple different descriptions of that. Then some say he walked on the ceiling, but he kind of flipped over his grandmother. So it was more, he flipped over his grandmother, sat in the chair, and then looked at everyone who was kind of in that room, and gave this Grinch-like grin, to them, and his eyes were white, So, and they ran, and everyone who was in that room ran out. And
what I would have done. Definitely what I would have done. This is really scary stuff. And you're saying there's plenty of witnesses to all of this.
Yeah.
I've got somebody who said yes. It was on Fox News. It's been all over the place. So this is that case. My goodness. Continue, Father. I don't know what to say.
So when I heard that story, I said, okay, there is something there, but I explained to them, I can't do anything now. I have to get permission from the bishop to do this, and I need to do an investigation. But I am willing to meet with everyone, and so I feel free to give them my contact information, and I'll meet with them as soon as possible.
Right.
And so what ended up happening is the 3 children were taken away from the parents, away from the mother and grandmother. So 2 of them the 2 older ones were put into with the Carmelite sisters in the area that take care of foster children.
Right.
But the 7-year-old who it took like 5 guys to hold down, and who was talking about what it's like to die and such, and seeing the boy in the closet at his home and such, he was taken to a children's psychiatric lockdown unit in another hospital, psychiatric hospital in another part of our area here.
So at this point, even after all of this and all of these witnesses, you're still not involved in the sense of doing an exorcism. I mean, you would think that when any medical person saw any of what you just described, they would, that's not in any of the books I read when I was becoming a nurse or a doctor. No way.
Yeah.
So I guess when were you then involved?
So I then contacted the mother and grandmother contacted me. They mentioned their children were taken away, and I said, okay, I can meet with you at the home, at your home on Sunday evening after my last Mass. I have a 5 o'clock Mass. I'm done at 6, so I could get there about 6:30. So I went to their home at 6:30 and was there for about 4 hours to do an investigation.
Right.
And the first 2 hours were pretty much them telling the whole story. And it all kind of started when they moved into the house. And the reason she moved into the house was that she was trying to get away from her ex-boyfriend, whom she found out was a married man, when his wife called her. I guess she discovered her phone number on his phone.
Found her.
And says, "What are you doing with my husband?" And she says, "Oh, I didn't know he's married. Don't worry, this relationship is over." And it kind of explained a lot of things. But she did say something that was kind of strange. And she said, "You will regret ever messing with my husband." And she said, "Well, don't worry, this is over." But he wouldn't let it go, and so he kept on kind of stalking her almost. And so she felt the best way was to move away and not let him know where they're going. So her brother's landlord said there was a house available very cheap, and so and they went to see it, and so they decided to move in there. And but I guess the boyfriend eventually found out where she moved to. Probably he followed her from work or something like that, and eventually found where she was living at, and then started to show up again. But when they moved into the house, it seemed to be things. First of all, they saw all kinds of horse flies. This is about November, so it's kind of, kind of late in the season for that. But so especially on the porch, and they were usually these a lot of dead horseflies, and so they would sweep them up, and the next day they'll find a whole mess of more, and they kept on sweeping up the horseflies.
Wow.
Then one time she saw someone walking back and forth, pacing in their living room. I think this was the grandmother, and she thought someone broke into their house. So when she jumped out of bed and turned on the light, no one was there. But when they looked on the ground, on the floor, there was muddy footprints.
Wow.
And they seemed to come up from the basement area. And then later on, they would hear footsteps coming up the basement. And so the way they kind of dealt with that was to put a lock on the the door from the kitchen to the basement. And then all of a sudden, they would hear steps coming up the steps, and then pounding on the door.
Oh, good Lord.
And when they would go and open it, they would see no one. And then other times, they would hear dogs barking out there, and then they would open up that door but not see anything.
Father, especially with regard to somebody coming up the steps to the locked door from the basement and pounding on the door, and then nobody being there. No offense, but how does anybody stay in a house with that kind of action going on? I just, you see it in movies, and you're sitting here screaming, "Get the heck out of that house!" And of course, they never do. And I guess they had a good deal on this house, and they didn't have a lot of money, so no choice.
Yeah, they were kind of trapped. So that's usually the one thing that keeps people from moving out. They have, they sign a lease and things, and so they would be liable to pay the whole thing, and so they really didn't have anywhere else to go, and so it was kind of livable in the early part. It seemed to escalate through the winter time. As I mentioned, the kids were starting to wake up with blood on their pillows and bloody noses, bloody gums, bloody lips, and things like that. But they couldn't see. The blood would just kind of appear out of nowhere and then kind of go away.
Was it at that point when you interviewed Mom and Grandma? At that point, were they noticing that this was moving from child to child?
Yeah, it was. They didn't see it be jumping, but it would affect one child one day, then another one another day, and another one another day,
right.
And such. So it was never, but never was it two at the same time. So they didn't kind of see that later. They would see something happening to the one child, but it would affect all three. And it wouldn't be till they kind of saw later that. Never was two things happening to two of them at the same time.
I see. All right, you had a pretty good, long, substantial interview with Mom and Grandma. I guess Mom was Latoya Amons, is that correct?
Yes, Latoya, yes.
Latoya, okay. What did you come away with from that interview? What did you make of her?
Yeah, actually, because I was always trying to figure out, when you're doing this, you're trying to figure out what's the source of this, what brought this in.
Right.
And now we're trying to do this without the kids there, because they're so.
Of course, yes.
And she didn't know quite, so I'm asking, what do you think, did they get involved in, did they play a game, Ouija board, video game,
Right.
We're trying to, and they pretty much, we couldn't come up with anything like that. Latoya then was mentioning that she also started to have kidney ailments and went to the doctor 3 times, like in January, with 3 different kidney ailments. And then one time, the only time the grandmother seemed to be affected was one time she was washing clothes in the basement, and all of a sudden something choked her, and she had to get out of the basement. But that was the only time she was ever attacked. But she did mention one time she saw all kinds of sand in the basement, strewn over the floor, and so she had to sweep it up, and it was like 2 buckets worth of sand that she had to sweep up from the basement and throw it outside. And then everything seemed to escalate with the last time the boyfriend came over to the house. Now, they would never let... She didn't want anything to do with the boyfriend. Would always tell her, "Go back to your wife. This is over with," and such. And he would keep on showing up, and and they would try to keep just tell him to go. But the last time he came to the house, he wanted to give the boys $5 each, but he didn't give anything to the girl, and I kind of found that strange, and I asked why was that, and I think Latoya was at work when that happened, and Rosa, the grandmother, was calling her and says he's here, and says get rid of him, and he says he wants to give the boys something. What does he want to give them? $5 each, and he said okay, that's okay, and. But I asked, why did he give something to the boys and nothing to the girl? And so Rosa said that he said that the boys needed this incentive to be good, but the girl didn't. But it just struck me there's something bizarre in all that. And so 3 days later is when kind of everything escalated in the house. And it was a family gathering. Their whole family was at the house. And all of a sudden, the girl gets, they're all sitting in the living room and such, and the girl gets pulled off the couch, and she's landed on the floor. And everyone looks at her and says, "What are you doing?" She says, "Someone pulled me off the couch." And then she started, my stomach's hurting and such. She was feeling sick, and then they would kind of take her to her room, and they were kind of trying to take care of her, and she's feeling nauseous. They would see her stomach kind of bulging, and such, and her legs kind of bulging and all that. And then Rosa went to the kitchen to get a washcloth so she could put on her head. And all of a sudden, behind her, in their living room, they had a freezer, and because there wasn't room in the kitchen. And all of a sudden, one of the boys got thrown into the freezer. And she turned around, and everyone heard this big boom, and said, "What happened to you?" And said, "Someone threw me into the freezer." And then he started to get sick.
Now, wait a minute. This is a freezer that is closed, right?
This is like a refrigerator freezer. So it's but it's in the living room because they didn't have room in their kitchen for it.
So it opened and he went fine.
It's a closed freezer, but he got thrown like at the doctor's office. He got thrown up against it, and everyone just heard the boom and turned around and saw him. They thought he ran into it. He said, "No, someone threw me into the freezer." And he says, "There's no one else around here." So then he started getting sick. And so they then took him into the bedroom, and the same things were happening to him. He was feeling nauseous. His stomach was, bumps were appearing, and his legs, bumps were, and bulges and things were appearing.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, the third boy was in the bathroom, and he got thrown out of the bathroom and went flying. And everyone turns around and says, what happened to you? And he says, "Someone threw me out of the bathroom." And then all of a sudden he got sick, the same way.
Right.
And with that, then everyone's leaving. I said, we're getting out of here. This is bizarre.
Right.
And so they kind of heard some of the stories before of what was happening, but this is the first time the family actually witnessed what was going on. And so all the family leaves except for a cousin, and she asked her parents if she could stay overnight with the girl, and they said that was okay. And so everyone left, and so they're kind of getting ready for bed. Everything seemed to settle down, and And so, and they turn off the lights in the bedroom and such. And Rosa and LaToya were about ready to get into bed and such, and they heard this scream, and they come running into the bedroom and open the door and turn on the light, and they see their daughter fall onto the bed. And the cousin said that she screamed because the girl was 2 feet off the bed, levitated.
Oh, okay.
And the girl didn't know. She woke up, after she fell on the bed, and she didn't know anything, what happened. And so they now kind of saw, well, we better do something. And before they were Baptist, but their church wouldn't help them out with the other things earlier. But Rosa's mother, who was kind of a shut-in in an apartment, had a neighbor who belonged to this deliverance church. They do deliverance services.
Yes.
And so Rosa tried to call her mother and to have them come over to see if they could do anything for but it took all kinds of different things were happening, interfering with their phone calls, so she would call them, one would call the other, and one would hear them but wouldn't hear the other, and then the other one would call back, and you could hear the one but not the other.
Electronic interference.
So like electronic interference. Then all of a sudden they would call again, and there was this staticky, but it sounded like a voice in the static, growling and things. And then in one of the calls back, they said that there was a whole series of zeros on their phone as the number, but eventually they finally got enough that they would send. She would talk to her neighbor, and the neighbor would have the church send people over that Tuesday. And so...
all right, Father, hold it there. It's a natural break point, I guess, or maybe not natural. How do you break this story at all? So you're hearing a story of possession, and you're going to hear a story of exorcism. This was a nationwide, worldwide story. I'm Art Bell. This is Midnight in the Desert.